Shalom, welcome back. We're working our way through the Rock of a Sure Foundation. We just finished up Book 1 of the Nazarene Acts, so we're moving on to Book 2. When the day dawned, which had been fixed for the discussion with Simon, Peter, rising at the first cock crowing, aroused us also, because we were sleeping in the same apartment, 13 of us in all, of whom next to Peter, Zacchaeus was first, then Zephaniah, Joseph, Micah, Eleazar, Phinehas, Lazarus, and Elisha. After these I, Clement, and Nicodemus, then Nicetas and Aquila, who had formerly been disciples of Simon, and were converted to the faith of Messiah under the teachings of Zacchaeus. Of the women there was no one present. As the evening lamp was still lasting, we all sat down, and Peter, seeing that we were awake, and that we were giving attention to him, having saluted us, immediately began to speak as follows. I confess, brethren, that I wonder at the power of human nature, which I see to be fit and suited to every call upon it. This, however, it occurs to me to say of what I have found by experience, that when the middle of the night has passed, I awake of my own accord, and sleep does not come to me again. This happens to me for this reason, that I have formed the habit of recalling to memory the words of my Master which I heard from himself, and for the longing I have towards them. I constrain my mind and my thoughts to be roused, that awakening to them, and recalling and arranging them one by one, I may retain them in my memory. From this, therefore, while I desire to cherish the sayings of the Master with all delight in my heart, the habit of waking has come upon me, even if there be nothing that I wish to think of. Thus, in some unaccountable way, when any custom is established, the old custom is changed, provided, indeed, that you do not force it above measure, but as far as the measure of nature admits. For it is not possible to be altogether without sleep, otherwise night would not have been made for rest. Then I, when I heard this, said, You have very well said, O Peter. For one custom is superseded by another. For when I was at sea, I was at first distressed, and all my system was disordered, so that I felt as if I had been beaten, and could not bear the tossing and the tumult of the sea. But after a few days, when I had gotten accustomed to it, I began to bear it tolerably, so that I was glad to take food immediately in the morning along with the sailors. Whereas before it was not my custom to eat anything before the 7th hour, now therefore, simply from the customs which I then acquired, hunger reminds me about that time at which I used to eat with the sailors, which, however, I hope to get rid of, when once another custom shall have been formed. I believe, therefore, that you also have acquired the habit of wakefulness, as you state, and you have wished at fitting time to explain this to us, that we also might not grudge to throw off and dispense with some portion of our sleep, that we may be able to take in the precepts of the living doctrine. For when the food is digested and the mind is under the influence of the silence of night, those things which are seasonably taught abide in it. So if you can imagine, being so eager to hear about the Messiah, that you would wake up in the middle of the night and there would just be like an impromptu Bible lesson before the rooster even crowed, while it's still dark outside. That's what's going on. As a non-morning person, I have I have a hard time picturing that, but it just shows you how devoted these men were to learning the correct message of the Master. That, and they didn't have cell phones and TV and stuff to keep them up late at night either, so they probably got to bed a little bit earlier than we usually do. Then Peter, being pleased to hear that I understood the purport of his preface, that he had delivered it for our advantage, and commending me, doubtless for the purpose of encouraging and stimulating me, began to deliver the following discourse. It seems to me to be seasonable and necessary to have some discussion relating to those things that are near at hand, that is, concerning Simon. For I should wish to know of what character and of what conduct he is. Wherefore, if any one of you has any knowledge of him, let him not fail to inform me, for it is of consequence to know these things beforehand. For if we have it in charge that when we enter a city we should first learn who in it is worthy, that we may eat with him, how much more is it proper for us to ascertain who or what sort of man he is, to whom the works of immortality are to be committed? For we ought to be careful, yes, extremely careful, that we cast not our pearls before swine. So Peter, he's looking for some insider information on Simon Magus. They want to know what type of person they're dealing with, and like he said, you don't want to cast your pearls before swine. But furthermore, it is appropriate for me to know who this man is because of this. For if I learn about him by his manners that he is honest with things which no person is, doubtful, especially those acknowledged of the fear of God, that is, I say, sobriety, justice, mercy, meekness, and the things corresponding to them, that everyone knows to be good, even if they profess it unwillingly, then it is right on account of the things in which he is manifestly honest, for us to give him the knowledge lacking to him, so that the bad things that are found of his conduct can be cleansed from his mind. So in other words, is Simon really kind of like a decent guy? He just is misled and doesn't know the things of God? Is he like an honorable person, an honest person? Because sometimes you can be, kind of like a good person, but you may not necessarily be a believer. And that's the type of person that Peter is looking to share the message with, not someone who's just inherently evil. Probably because someone who's inherently evil, if you start teaching them about the faith of Yeshua, they can turn around and use that to turn it into a profitable business, or to oppress people, or to control people. Take, for instance, Paul and the Roman Catholic Church that he spawned, and the condition of the way things were throughout history with regards to that institution. But if I learn about him that he is opposed to these matters, as being ruled by things that are manifestly sinful, it is only appropriate for me to reprove him and to bear witness against him, so that perhaps indeed he will change his planning and conduct. For those who are thus after testimony, it is not right to reveal the mysteries concerning the knowledge of God to them before they are turned back from their deeds and rectified. So, is he being ruled by things that are manifestly sinful? And if he is, he has to repent of those things before we start attempting to make him a convert. This is along the same lines of what was discussed in Acts 15, where at the end of the discussion about the Gentiles coming into the church, if we want to call it that, the assembly, James stands up and gives his ruling, and he institutes 4 starter purity commandments. These are not the only 4 commandments Gentiles are ever supposed to keep. These are the 4 commandments that will get them cleaned up enough to let them in the door. The first one is to abstain from sexual immorality. And then there's 3 commandments concerning food. 1, don't eat things sacrificed to idols. Or you don't participate in idolatry, period. Don't eat things with blood. And don't eat things that are strangled. So, don't eat things that have been, bled out. The thing about the whole commandment about being strangled is, like, if you slice a animal's neck, that's a type of strangulation. If you there's a number of ways that you kill an animal before you butcher it, and usually those things deal with the neck. I mean, now we have these very barbaric guns that will break an animal's skull and kill them that way. Usually the 3rd or 4th time that is hit with it. But I really think that this whole like things strangled, not to eat things strangled, I think that's just a prohibition against eating dead flesh in general. So you have one commandment about sexual immorality, and you have 3 commandments about that have to do with food and what you eat. And these are not the only commands that you're given. Later on, Peter specifically says that. But even if you just read the text of Acts 15, he says, we don't wish to burden the Gentiles that are turning. And that word for turning is present participle active, which means you're in the process of turning. You haven't turned, you are turning. So they're not fully initiated. These are just starter purity commandments, and that's it. So it's kind of the same idea. Like, is Simon clean enough to let us get him in the door if we do end up converting him? That's what Peter's basically trying to figure out. He doesn't want to reveal the mysteries concerning the knowledge of God to someone who's not worthy. I really feel like a lot of the problems in the church today could be solved by instituting and sticking to those 4 purity commandments. I mean, just look at the one about sexual immorality and look at the kind of people that we have in the church. We've got homosexuals now behind the pulpit. Well, if fornication or sexual immorality is any type of sexual activity that's not sanctioned by God, aka marriage, then this commandment to not allow anyone into the congregation if they are participating in sexual immorality, that actually answers that question. I was listening to a debate one time, and this Christian who was in part of the debate was bragging about how he was instrumental in standing up for letting gays in the church, even back before it was fashionable to do so. Like, he was one of the early ones that was pushing to let the homosexuals in the church. Does his Bible not have an Acts 15? He was saying, well, I see the way that the faith of God has evolved over the years, and I see it getting more and more inclusive. Like in the Old Testament, it was for the Jews only, which the Bible never says that. And then he says, and then it was spread to the Gentiles, and so then you have the Gentile church, and it's like, well, not really, because if you convert and you go from being a Gentile to a believer, you're no longer a Gentile. You're now part of Israel. So it's not really more inclusive. It's always been, the church has always been Israel. The assembly has always been Israel. And it was always open for converts. Like, it's just these weird doctrines that Christians come up with and that there's no basis for. There, to think that there's no way that someone who was not born a Jew could ever become part of Israel. That's completely false. In fact, there's instructions in the Torah for how to bring someone into the covenant. So what I've seen is not that the Bible or the faith taught by Jesus becomes more and more inclusive. What I see is that Yeshua's teachings are actually stricter than what we see in the Old Testament. The difference is that the church just gets more and more lax on following the commandments of its supposed founder. That's the thing that's changed. So if sexual immorality was not allowed in the church in Acts 15, it should not be allowed in the church in AD 2025. It just shouldn't. Picking up again in the bold part, but if perhaps he will come and be provoked with us to speak of things not proper for him to speak, because he is disorderly in his behavior, it is prudently fitting for us to mock him. because it is inappropriate to be interrogated continuously on account of people who are idiotic listeners. That's some pretty harsh words from Peter, isn't it? Those who already think us as ignorant of something and rage at us because of this, as thus we would become divided and greatly injured, while they are ignorant of our thinking. So I think what Peter's saying here is like, look, man, if Simon gets up here and has an attitude and he's mocking us and he's being rude, I'm going to mock him right back. I'm going to give him what he gives to me. If we have an orderly discussion and he's being cordial, then I'll be cordial back to him. I think what Peter's saying is, don't allow yourself to be run over by someone. And this is something that I've seen over the years in various aspects, where you'll have somebody who's a non-believer, an atheist, or just some other type of person who doesn't believe in Messiah, and they will be all types of abusive and condescending and lie to you, falsely accuse you, and then you kind of like snap back at them a little bit, and they act all offended and accuse you of not being Christian or not obeying Jesus because you give them back what they're giving to you. And it's like, well, first of all, I don't think we should allow non-Christians to judge us on how we keep the commandments of our master. I really don't. When I told this story a while back about this group that I used to be part of that operated several Facebook groups. And it was part of like an outreach type of thing, so that we could interact with people who were not part of our group. But we ended up having some witches, and they were self-proclaimed witches that came into our group. And that's one of the techniques they did. Whenever anyone would attempt to get them removed from the group, they would insinuate that that was not very Christ-like to remove them from the group, that the group should be open to everyone. That's what Jesus would want. And what it is it's a plot, it's a ploy to disarm you. And that's really what's happened with the church. Back in the 80s, the church was always portrayed as being very rigid, almost hostile to certain types of people, and judgmental for objecting to indecent television programs and things like that. And it got to the point where the church stopped objecting to things because they didn't want to be labeled as mean. And it was because they were allowing the non-Christians to accuse them of not being Christ-like. The people who don't keep Christ's commandments themselves controlled the whole debate because they were accusing the church of not being inclusive enough. You shouldn't ever let someone, and this is the point, you should never let someone who they themselves rejects the commandments of Yeshua ever accuse you of doing the same. It's not their place to accuse you of that. Now, if you're doing something wrong and somebody within your congregation comes to you or something like that, that's different. But if you don't let a prostitute criticize you for the way your marriage works, So why would you allow like a witch or a Satanist or someone to criticize you for the way you practice your faith? You shouldn't do that. They're using that to control you. They're not using it to make a good, honest judgment about you. But the point is, Peter's saying you don't have to let them run over you. Stand up to them. If they're mocking you, turn the tables on them. I'm sure that just made some people mad who are listening right now. Now, after Peter, I'm not saying falsely accuse them of something. A lot of times when somebody is falsely accusing you, they're being a hypocrite, because people tend to see their own faults within someone else. So it's pretty easy usually to turn the tables on someone like that and just point out their own hypocrisy. I'm not saying get up there and falsely accuse them. I'm not saying just get up there and cuss them out or something. I'm just saying turn the tables on him. Stand up for yourself. Now, Peter told us these things. NazActs asked of him permission to speak, and when Peter allowed him, he said, "Forgive me, O Peter, for I am greatly afraid lest in the disputation with Simon you shall be found inferior. For it happens, whenever one person speaks the truth, he cannot prevail, because the listeners are either indiscriminate, prejudiced, or the contrary, or without care for the better, as they desire victory for whoever they give preference. But with all these things, Simon is also a cunning and crafty sophist, who has grown strong with the objections and stratagems of syllogisms. But more grievous and evil than all, he is also greatly skilled in sorceries. Wherefore I fear lest, on account of his being strongly fortified from every side, in the presence of those hearers who do not know him, when he will speak lies, they shall be considered truths by them. For even when we would have been able to escape from him and believe in Yeshua, if we had not been a help to him in his deeds through sorcery, and recognized that he was a deceiver." So, this description of Simon being cunning and crafty sophist, grown strong in the objections of stratagems and syllogisms, this actually perfectly describes the Paul we see in his letters. Paul is very cunning and very gifted at using this Greco-Roman rhetorical method that is being discussed here. And there are, and believe me, I'm not necessarily an expert on Greek and Roman rhetorical styles of argument, but there are plenty. You can just do a web search on this subject, and you'll find thousands of college dissertations that are online from various seminary students that go into detail about all the various objections and stratagems of syllogisms, and how Paul is such a master at it. So it's a really a very accurate description of Paul, at least in Paul's letters. And this is one of the reasons I've postulated, is it possible that maybe Simon was Paul's Messiah? Maybe those letters were being written with the assistance of Simon. Because Paul speaks about how when people would meet him in person, they were not impressed. They said, your letters are weighty, but we meet you in person and you're just kind of like a disappointment. So why is Paul's letters different than the way he appears in person? Maybe someone was helping him write his letters, someone who's more gifted in that type of style of writing. When NazActs had thus spoken, Aquila also asking that he might be permitted to speak, proceeded in manner following. "Receive, I entreat you, most excellent Peter, the assurance of my love towards you, for indeed I also am extremely anxious on your account. And do not disdain me because of this, because for a person to be concerned about his friend comes from love, but to ignore a person is no less than hatred. For I call witness to God that it is not because you are inferior in my eyes, as if being feeble in disputation. I fear lest you shall be found inferior to Simon, for indeed I have never been present while you have conducted a disputation. Wherefore I do not know the matters pertaining to you, but I do know the impieties of this one. Yet I am concerned about your honor also, about the souls of the listeners, and before everything about the truth. For in everything that he wills, he is an able sorcerer, because he especially has no friends. Indeed, we accurately know all these things, for from our youth we were ministering helpers for him in his impieties, and if we were not certainly in truth friends of God, even until now we would have been erroneously working his same things with him. However, the love of God that was innate within us was able to turn away the enemy to evil and the children of the house to good. Wherefore I surmise that our case was not without providence, first to become his friends to ascertain how he performs those deeds of wonder, and afterwards to get an idea of him and flee from him. For who would not marvel at the wonders done by him, so as to think of him a God come down from the heavens for the salvation of human beings? Man, that sounds like that sounds like the Christians' impression of Paul right there. They think Paul is the Messiah himself. But I confess about my own affairs that if I had not been his helper in the things done by him, even I would have been compelled. Wherefore it was not a great matter of ours to depart and flee from him, for we knew that he did these things by sorcery, as a man who is a sorcerer and a magician. But if you also want to accurately know all the matters pertaining to him, whose son he is, from where he comes, and what he wants, the matter pertaining to him, and how these are the things that he has done, hear now. This Simon's father was Antionus, and his mother Rachel. By nation he is a Samaritan, from the village of Getonin. He is a sorcerer, and is exceedingly well trained in the Greek literature, desirous of glory, and boasting above all the human race. That kind of sounds like 2 Corinthians. So that he wishes himself to be believed to be an exalted power, which is above God the Creator, and to be thought to be Messiah, and be called the Standing One. And he uses his name as implying that he can never be dissolved, asserting that his flesh is so compacted by the powers of divinity that it can endure to eternity. Hence, therefore, he is called the Standing One, as though he cannot fall under decay. So again, this Simon was thought to be the Messiah. And back to my theory that Simon was Paul's Messiah, if he appeared to Paul in the wilderness, maybe Paul would have thought that he was some type of a god, or a man god, or something. For after John the Baptist was killed, as even you know, Dositheus received authority over the very sect, with 30 elect and one woman called Syrah, as the 30 were to be the course of the moon. This Simon, known I know not how, but for the sake of loving vainglory, met Dositheus, and with a false friendship requested of him that when anyone from those 30 should die, he would immediately be appointed in the place of the one who died. For not even before a trial does one enter in and become appointed, nor of that number is anyone added or subtracted. On account of this, all the remainder of those who adhere to them, because of desiring to be deemed worthy of a place, exhibit the manners that are acceptable to their order, so that after the death of one man from the 30, they may appoint from those men adhering to them someone they choose who is worthy of the place of the one who died. Therefore Dositheus was revered in many things, and when the number diminished, he appointed Simon. So we should probably stop at this point. We'll pick it up next time, starting from here. Shalom.